Now, reparations for slavery should not be talked about at all. Reparations for black people under the free system, that's what we should be focused on. Because when we got out of slavery, that's when they started to attack us. Because you have to remember, the free system is the Caucasian system. That was their system. So Caucasians all of a sudden became white. Don't you notice that before slavery, not every Caucasian was considered to be white at all, because white was a social status. It's like nobility. Nobility, there's no color. White didn't necessarily mean the color of your skin. It meant a social status. It's like celebrities. Celebrities, it's not a color, it's a social status. So that's what white was. But all of a sudden, when black people became free, every Caucasian was considered to be white. That means even the lowliest Caucasian had more credibility than a black person. So they played this game. So black people, when we got out of slavery, they started making us targets. We started to become targets. So Black Wall Street, for instance, one of the greatest atrocities in American history. Look what they did. So you see, if Black Wall Street was actually under the slave system, all those people would have been rounded up, put in jail, put on trial, and then executed because they just destroyed property. Not only the slaves, because we know slaves are property, but also their homes. The slave owners would not tolerate that. They would not tolerate it at all. So black people will actually get justice under the slave system. But the free system, no. Because it's their system, they're the ones that are controlling the courts, they're the people who they're in higher government and everything like that, and law enforcement, so they can do whatever they want to black people, and they did. And they still do it to this day. But we're gonna take over their system. But that's what they did. So, and they're misrepresenting slavery. They could say all this stuff about slavery, and yes, slavery was not perfect. It had its problems, but overall, they're misrepresenting it. Just like they're misrepresenting history, black history, African history, or history in general, they're misrepresenting. So if you believe what they say about slavery, then you must believe what they say about black people or African history. And they don't say much about African history. They say basically that we didn't have much of a history.
A white man that I've worked for, if he's alive today, he's a liberal with a capital L. His name was Gagsteiner. I asked him about some books on the African people in ancient history. And in the language of the South, he let me down slow. He spoke kindly. He said, John, I'm sorry that you came from a race that's made no history. But if you persevere, if you obey laws and study hard, you make history someday.
When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those are the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree.
You see how they misrepresented our history? So this was like in the mid 20th century, okay? But they've been saying this for the longest time. Even now, basically, our history is just slavery. But of course, they came out with Mansa Musa. But the thing is that Mansa Musa, they knew about him for the longest time. But they've been saying that, black people or Africans have no history. And actually, the Mali Empire is far more fascinating than the Egyptian Empire. Just to let you know, it's far more fascinating, but you'll find out about that eventually. Because they already give you hints. Mansa Musa, the richest man that ever lived. Because people are going to say, King Solomon is the richest man that ever lived. Well, who is King Solomon outside the Bible? Figure it out. Okay? Now, this is intolerable. Like, why would we believe anything they have to say about our history? They're monopolizing the history, aren't they? Who's talking about ancient Egypt? It's mainly Caucasians. I was watching a documentary about voodoo, and yes, there were some black people in the documentary, but they were constantly referring to white people when it comes to voodoo. It's like, oh my goodness, what is going on here? What is this, a Twilight Zone? I mean, it's outrageous, but it's understandable what's happening if you understand the history. They got their New World Order. They got their New World Order through the Protestant Reformation. Reformation, Renaissance, Rebirth. They got their New World Order through that. And then what did they do? They started pushing down black people. They started pushing down women, gay people, socialism. And now the New World Order is coming. What's happening? Black people are rising up. Women are rising up. Gay people are rising up. And socialism is rising up. You know when actually this happened? I'll tell you exactly when this happened.
The first impulse is to run. And when there's no place left to run, pray. Pray like there's no tomorrow. Because for the people dying all around you, tomorrow will never come. No one knows where to hide, how to save themselves, how to survive. Bodies beyond number. A firestorm of violence and madness. The terrible vengeance of God. It is the Black Death of the Middle Ages. The greatest biological disaster in the history of mankind. It is, as one witness testifies, the end of the world.
So the 1300s was the Dark Ages. It wasn't 1,000 years, it was the 1300s. That's when climate change started, there were floods, there were pestilence, there was wars, famine, disease. That was a horrible century, okay? Now, you see the flagellants, those people that are hitting themselves, those are the flagellants. Those are actually the medieval version of white supremacists, because eventually those crazy people, okay, because also you have to understand that the Catholics and the Protestants, who the flagellants, they were the Protestants, they're different people, because the language of the Catholics had to be translated into the Protestants. So there were people that were living amongst the Catholics that were totally different culture. Okay, that was white people. Black people were the Catholics, because they're not going to tell you, or I want you to ask yourself, or actually ask even Jews, because when they talk about the flagellants attacking the Jews, they're actually talking about black people, not Jews that we know nowadays. Because I would love for you to ask a Jew or ask a white person about the Black Madonna and Child, because there's over 400 Black Madonnas throughout Europe. Most of them are in France. And ask them how in the world, or why in the world, would you create something that's not in your image? Well, they wouldn't. The black people would, but they wouldn't. Okay, they would create it in their image. It's because black people were there in Europe, and they like to say that we weren't, but we were there. And the reason why they don't want to talk about it is because they slaughtered us in Europe. That's why they don't want to talk about it. And these flagellants, they were crazy. They were crazy people. But I'm gonna let you listen to more about the Dark Ages.
At the dawn of the 14th century, Western civilization is riding a phenomenal streak of prosperity.
Europe has had 3, maybe 4 centuries of really good times. The church has been strong, various kingdoms have been strong, trade has grown, cities have grown, industry has grown, there haven't been any natural catastrophes, weather's been nice, population's been growing. It's really been a nice time for Europe.
But this long expansion is about to collide with a new reality. Suddenly, global climate patterns shift. Temperatures plummet and crops fail. With startling swiftness, the golden age collapses and visions of the apocalypse come true.
The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse have come. Famine hits, plague hits, war is all over, and death is all over.
By the 1340s, war ravages the continent. The deepening crisis hits peasants hard.
So the Catholic Church was very strong for centuries, right? Then all of a sudden this catastrophe happened, and somehow they turned on us. What we call white people turn on us, because there's nothing in history where they say that, this is the reason why we do this to black people, this, that, and the other. This is why we treat Africans or black people the way we do, because this, that, and the other. They don't say that in history. They don't say that at all in history. But this is the reason why. Because they are, in their head, they thought that we were to blame for all this catastrophe, because we were the head of the church. Because I would love for you to tell me why what we call white people nowadays had this attitude towards us throughout the centuries. Like, where does that come from? And I'm telling you exactly where it comes from. Because we were the Catholics, and they thought that we were not protecting them. And as a result, they turned on us.
The very fabric of society is unraveling, and no one seems to know how to weave it back together.
This was God's vengeance on humans for their wickedness and sin. What better way to respond to that than by an extraordinary penance that would take away that sin?
And so, in their terror, the people turned to religious zealots who whipped themselves in a brutal imitation of Christ's own suffering. Their fanaticism will lead the crowds further into hysteria, persecution, and mass murder.
So you see, this was the beginning of Protestantism, because they say the church was strong. The church was very strong. Then all of a sudden in the 1300s, things started to turn. The floods, the famine, the pestilence, the wars, the disease, it all came to a head in the 1300s. That was a horrible year, and that was the breakdown of the Catholic Church, because before that, it was very strong. And these flagellants, they were crazy. And as I said, there's two different people. There's the Catholics and the Protestants. Okay, black people and white people, their cultures were totally different. Okay, and these people, they were crazy. And there was people who were very much into these flagellants. They believed that they would bring about the end of the plague. And it was crazy. It's like there's actually a scientific way of actually doing stuff, and that's what the Catholics were trying to do. But these people were like, oh my God, no, we have to beat ourselves, which was actually making things worse. But they became very popular. And because we were trying to protect these people, and these people were amongst us, but they went crazy. You understand? And then all of a sudden, they started attacking us, even though we were dying pretty much at the same rate as them. It was insane.
The faithful decide to take matters into their own hands. They are known as the flagellants. Fanatics who think they can win God's mercy by imitating Christ's bloody passion. Theirs is an extreme measure for an extreme time, and people flock to them in droves.
People looked upon the flagellants as helping to ward off the disease, as perhaps their extraordinary penance might avert God's wrath and take away the plague.
The notion of flagellating oneself might have a particular appeal, a very dramatic method of, a painful, dramatic method of scourging oneself of the sins in the expectation that you might not be alive tomorrow.
In groups as large as 1,000 men, the flagellants commit themselves to a master for 33.5 days to mark their Savior's years on earth. Forsaking bath, bed, and sex, they piously march from city to city, performing gruesome masochistic acts before appreciative throngs. In his journals, the French chronicler Jean d'Yvenet writes,
"The penitents scourged themselves with whips of hard-knotted leather with little iron spikes. Some made themselves bleed very badly between the shoulder blades, and some foolish women had clothes ready to catch the blood and smear it on their eyes, saying it was miraculous blood."
So when I say crazy, I'm not kidding. I mean, she or women were trying to catch the blood and put it in their face, put it in their eyes. They thought it was miraculous blood. This is bizarre behavior. And as I said, the Catholics and the Christians were totally different cultures. They were totally different people. And I'm telling you that black people were the Catholics. The Christians, what we call Christians, were the Protestants, because Christian was actually a bad word. It was like sort of like cretin, which is a person afflicted with cretinism, a person considered to be extremely stupid. Now, the Latin word was Christianus. Okay, that was the Latin word, Christianus. Christian, alluding to the humanity of such people despite their handicaps. Like, yes, they had issues, but they did believe, they tried to understand our ways, but they took it to the extreme. You understand? And they just went ham on it. And they completely distorted everything that we were teaching them, and they backstabbed us, and then they took over, and then they said that, oh, black people are inferior, black people have no history to speak of, black people are uncivilized, which is a complete lie. It's basically they're talking about themselves, but they're pushing it on us now. So this is what it was. They were not that bright back in the day. So what we know as white people nowadays, Caucasians, Christians, they're a lot better now than their ancestors. They are. But back then, it was a problem. And we tried to help them, and things went awry, and look where we are now.
In 1348, a maelstrom of hate more vicious than even the Black Death itself erupts. Shock gives way to a witch hunt. Someone must be responsible for this catastrophe, and they should pay. In a torrent of hysteria and fear, the crowds target the helpless and innocent in a bloodbath of biblical proportions.
Now, remember I told you that the flagellants are the medieval version of white supremacists? They have the same MO. Look, they were religious zealots, and they were going into churches and harming people, killing people, torturing people. I mean, these people, I'm going to say it again, they're crazy. They were crazy. They were doing all these nasty things in the name of God, in the name of, trying to get rid of the plague. It's like, well, we're dying just as much as you are. What the hell is your problem? And they're trying to find a scapegoat. And they're indiscriminately killing a whole bunch of people, and these people are mainly Jews, but I'm telling you that these Jews are actually black people, because as I said again, ask any Jew, why in the world did you create the Black Madonna and Child? Where does that come from? Why would you create something that's not in your image? Well, as I said, they wouldn't, because black people were there. Black people created the Black Madonna and Child. It was in their image, okay? We were in there in Europe, and they slaughtered us. So that's what they're hiding from us.
The Jewish merchant Agamet has traveled through hundreds of miles, devastated by the plague. But ahead of him waits a greater horror, a bloodbath of epic proportions.
It's human nature, I suppose, to look for a scapegoat in times of crisis. Jews always seem to be the scapegoat, and in the Black Death they were as well.
For the flagellants, it is an easy leap from criticizing the church to attacking the Jews. For to medieval Christians, no one offends God more.
There is a whole history of blood libels against the Jews, a whole history of persecution of the Jews by Christians during the Middle Ages.
Betrayed by his distinctive clothing which marks him as a Jew, Agamet is taken to town officials for questioning. He is not alone, according to 14th century chronicler Jean de Venette.
The infection and the sudden death which it brought were blamed on the Jews. who were said to have poisoned wells and rivers and corrupted the air.
War ein Beutel, den dir der Rabbiner gegeben hat. Was war denn eigentlich im Beutel drin?
Ich habe keinen
Lügner.
keinen bekommen.
Lügner.
Keinen.
Du hast Flüsse vergiftet, nicht wahr?
Ich schwöre.
Lügner. Lügner.
After hours of torture, Agamad breaks down. He falsely confesses that a rabbi did give him a pouch filled with venom, which he used to poison the wells.
They were forced to confess that no Jews are innocent. All Jews are guilty. They're all part of this conspiracy. No one can be cleared of these charges.
Devenet reports that confessions like Agamet's fly up and down the Rhine.
Accordingly, the whole world brutally rose against them. And in Jewish communities, many thousands were indiscriminately butchered, slaughtered, and burnt alive by the Christians.
What's poisoning us is the Jew's presence itself. That the Jew's presence is a moral failing. It's our sin to tolerate them, and this is what's bringing this punishment.
As Pope Clement VI pointed out at the time, Jews were dying in equal number to Christians, so it was fantastical to argue that Jews were poisoning people during the Black Death.
The Pope's pleas fall on deaf ears. On St. Valentine's Day, 1349, the citizens of Strasbourg round up as many as 2,000 Jews and burn them at the stake. The atrocity is repeated in more than 15 cities in Germany and Switzerland. The people of Europe have been poisoned, not by some insidious Jewish plot, but by fear, hate, and ignorance. The lethal combination is spinning out of control, even faster than the Black Death.
So like I said, the Jews were black people. Because why did Caucasians have an attitude towards black people or Africans throughout history? Why? They don't tell you why, but in this documentary, they're telling you exactly why, and I'm telling you exactly why. I'm reading between the lines. This is exactly why, because we were the Jews, we were the ones that created the Black Madonna and Child. That's why there's over 400 Black Madonnas all throughout Europe, most of them in France, and there's Black Madonnas all around the world. We do have a history, a very prominent history, which they try to avoid talking about. And the reason why they try to avoid talking about it, because they committed a massive slaughter against us in Europe. A massive slaughter against us in Europe. Again, why in the world would Caucasians create a Black Madonna and Child? Why would Jewish people, let's say, what we know as Jewish people today, why would they create the Black Madonna and Child? Why? Well, they didn't. We did. And they are the Caucasians were the ones that were attacking us. All throughout history, they were attacking us because of this event.
But as the fortunes of peasants rise, the lot of the ruling class plummets. For centuries, nobles have depended on serfs to work the estates. Now, with better jobs drawing peasants elsewhere, nobles are left without a labor force, forcing them to gather their own bitter harvest.
So this is where the whole concept of freedom comes in, because they weren't tied to the land anymore. They needed workers so they could go anywhere. Before, they couldn't do that. So the whole freedom thing happened because of the plague, because they were tied to the land, and now they could go anywhere, and they liked that. So that's where the freedom thing started. And notice that the Protestants were about faith alone, right? The Catholics, which were black people, we were about socialism, because socialism is faith and good works. Well, good works. Good works is a form of socialism. Then you could see why they had an attitude towards that, because good works is a form of socialism. They didn't like that. They cut that out. And we know that Caucasians did not like socialism. They hated it. They had an attitude towards socialism. They had an attitude towards black people. They had an attitude towards women. They had an attitude towards gay people. And notice those four things are rising up right now. There's a new world order coming, and black people are rising up, women are rising up, gay people are rising up, and socialism is rising up, and white power influenced population is on the decline. The meek shall inherit the earth. Because as I said, we had no problems with Caucasian people. We had no problems until they backstabbed us. They became crazy and they backstabbed us. We had no issue with them before. And the thing is that they're not being honest about the history. So what do you expect? Karma is coming back.